So for the third time this week, Russia launched a large armored assault against Ukrainian lines. And also, for the third time this week, they suffered a bunch of vehicles destroyed and Russian soldiers killed. In fact, one Russian mill blogger said, quote, "Our commanders learned nothing. Valhalla is receiving reinforcement." So today we're going to take a quick look at some battlefield updates, a couple different key areas in Ukraine, as well as the deep strike campaign against Russia's energy infrastructure. Starting out with this armored attack taking place, again, just north of Pokrovsk. We've got some videos here produced by a couple different Ukrainian units where they say on October 16th, the enemy made another attempt at a massive mechanized attack on Dobropilia. This is just north of Pokrovsk. They say the enemy's ultimate goal was to capture the settlement of Shakov. And let's go over to a quick map here to give you an idea of the area we're talking about for some context. Deep state map, zooming into Pokrovsk here. This is the salient to the north near Dobropilia, just to the west. Shakov here to the east. So this little section right here, 3 different large armored assaults in the course of the last week, and that's where the footage is coming from today as well. They say between 5:30 and 8 o'clock in the morning, the enemy launched an attack with 22 armored vehicles. The enemy began preparations for the assault in advance. To complicate the mining of advanced drones, the enemy set up observation posts to detect and destroy them. The enemy command also tried to change the tactics of the offensive, whereas previously columns of enemy armored vehicles with infantry advanced from deep within their own battle formations. This time, the enemy tried to bring the equipment closer to Shakov and hide it in a forest belt. The maneuver failed. 2 armored vehicles were detected by reconnaissance and destroyed by artillery and FPV drones before they could hide in the forest. On October 16th, thanks to the timely engineering preparation of positions, effective mining, and coordinated actions, the enemy attack was thwarted. As a result, 9 Russian armored vehicles were destroyed and 4 were damaged. Now, this one's a little bit confusing because we've seen now the same tactic generally employed 3 days this week, and for a long time, months now, we haven't seen Russia put this number of armored vehicles into a single assault because of what you're seeing right here. In fact, there's a couple different Russian assessments we'll get into here in a second where they say, what are we doing? Like, we know how this is going to turn out. If I have to guess as to why we're seeing this right now, I would say there might be a desire for Russia to show their population some sort of significant gains on the battlefield. By and large, across the front, it's pretty stagnant. There are minor Russian advances in some areas. We'll get to those later in today's video, but it's nothing significant. We're seeing a continuation of Ukrainian deep strikes inside of Russian territory. Yes, those are matched by Russian strikes in Ukraine. And we've seen NATO and the United States signal just in the last couple days that they are not going to be abandoning Ukraine. In fact, there's talk right now of Tomahawks actually being sent to Ukraine in their fight against Russia. So maybe Russia is looking for something significant to be able to show their population. So they're really forcing the offensive here with armored vehicles. And the result is kind of as expected. Russian mill blogger Military Informant has his own take on this, where he said, quote, "Judging by the footage published by the enemy, the column was detected by drones at the deployment stage 15 to 20 kilometers from the front line, after which it was allowed to come closer and then shelled by artillery and drones." Think about that real quick. So what he's saying is, and this is a problem for both sides all across the front, is no ability to mass firepower undetected. So he's saying that these Russian armored vehicles, these troop movements, were noticed 15 to 20 kilometers away from the front, and they were watched, observed as they came closer. And then as soon as they came within artillery range, artillery opened up, there were mines there, and the drones started hitting these positions as well. He said they tried to reduce the effect of Ukrainian FPV drones by means of pre-established observation posts. Small groups on motorcycles and quad bikes took positions in the groves along the future route of the column, after which they were supposed to fire at Ukrainian drones to prevent them from mining the path and attacking the vehicles. However, due to fairly good weather and well-conducted reconnaissance, the Ukrainian armed forces uncovered the entire offensive plan in advance, which is why the mechanized column practically did not even reach its target. Most of the vehicles were hit and destroyed along the way. This is further confirmation that large mechanized breakthroughs under normal conditions are now either practically impossible to achieve their goals without very heavy losses in personnel and equipment. Each one of these assaults so far this week has seen 12 to 18 Russian armored vehicles destroyed, a significant number of motorcycles and quad bikes, and then depending on which source you look at, between 70 and 100 Russian soldiers killed in each instance. It's like the same footage being played over and over and over again. And this is being picked up by some Russian mill bloggers. They're saying, what is happening here? Like, what is going on? Callsign Leon said, quote, "Yesterday, information appeared about another bloody assault from our side. Unfortunately, it was confirmed. Our valiant commanders learned nothing from similar actions in Volodar, Avdiivka, etc. As a result, losses are dozens of killed in action and 17 units of equipment. Is anyone going to be held accountable for this or not? Since the beginning of the hostilities, I have never seen news of some bastard being punished for such a slaughter of our guys. Almost 4 years have passed since the start of the special military operation, and this shit remains as it was. Valhalla, unfortunately, is receiving reinforcements." So it's strange to see these tactics in broad daylight, and we're not the only ones looking at that going, what? Even Russians are saying this is ridiculous. Guys, there's a reason that they went away from these large armored assaults into some of these smaller advancing elements on quad bikes, on motorcycles, or sometimes even on foot. It certainly has slowed Russia's ability to take any significant portion of terrain or advance very far at all. They're essentially going at the pace of a soldier walking, but the trade-off there is they're not losing as much armored equipment as they did just in the last couple days. This is like 2 battalions worth of Russian armored vehicles destroyed in the last 7 days. It's a lot. It's like going back to the early days of the war. Now, I do want to shift over to a couple other areas of the battlefield because a lot of the focus right now is understandably in and around Pokrovsk. This is no doubt where the heaviest fighting is happening along the front, but looking at deep state map here, there's a couple other areas I want to key in on, looking at some Russian assessments in Kupiansk and then a little bit further down here in the Zaporizhia area. So moving into Kupiansk, I have started to notice some kind of low-grade Russian propaganda accounts, the ones that's like all AI type generated, are talking about Ukrainian forces being surrounded here and cut off. That's not the case, but it kind of signals that there is an increase in Russian offensive operations in this area, and they are paying attention there. So looking up here at Kupiansk, and I'm going to shift over to, there's a couple times where the satellite view here might be better. So we are seeing, no doubt, movement of Russian forces into Kupiansk itself. And to back out a little bit and kind of contextualize this, the green is Ukrainian-held territory, the red Russian-held territory, and the gray is kind of the contested areas. So looking at Paratrooper's Diary, a Russian mill blogger here, he said, "Our troops continue fighting for the central part of Kupiansk," right here on the map. "The armed forces of Ukraine have brought in reinforcements from special forces and are resisting. Counterattacks have also begun in the areas of Sobolevka," so a couple areas here, southwest, "Moskova, a little further to the northwest, and Radkovka, up here to the north." So he's saying Ukrainian counterattacks are happening in these 3 areas to the west and north, attempting to stretch our forces and prevent advancement. He did mention that a couple areas here to the south, Ukraine is trying to bring, or just to keep some of their forces resupplied in this area, and there's only a handful of viable crossings across this river. You can kind of see them here. I know the quality's not great on this map, but some of these crossings across the river are being effectively targeted, he says, by Russian drone crews, and every time one of these bridges is either destroyed or heavily targeted, Ukraine opts to bring some supplies in via quadcopter drones or some of the heavy Baba Yaga drones, and he says that a lot of their units in the area are specifically targeting those right now to try to cut down on the ability for Ukraine to reinforce elements in this area east of Kupiansk. So, definitely increased op tempo recently. I don't know the total number of Ukrainian forces here and what this defensive posture actually looks like. But of course, as we've seen in other areas of the front, as Russia, again, zooming out, you can kind of see the pincer that Russia is, in a sense, kind of trying to close off here. So as they do that, we'll keep an eye on this area and see when and if Ukrainian forces start to pull back, maybe using this river as more of a buffer defensive line. I think we're quite a ways away from that now, but we are seeing a significant increase in Ukrainian operations here. Now, shifting a little further southwest, actually southwest of Pokrovsk, there is an area here I wanted to key in on because we did start to see some, let's see if we can get this right. It was Olaskivka, and this is just north of Verbov. Here we go. So to come out and back in, We've got Pokrovsk here. We're going to be moving down here, kind of on the border of, bordering into Zaporizhia here. There was a settlement just taken over by Russian forces here, Unclassified. And if we look at the map, how this has changed in the last couple weeks, you see that there was definitely some fighting there over the course of the last couple weeks, but then seemingly out of nowhere, there you go. On the 10th, we see Russian forces kind of advance pretty far through Ukrainian lines, and it sounds like right now, based off some footage we have overhead, it looks like Russian forces have taken this village. Now, an assessment of that attack, and along with the footage here, is from, Paratrooper Diaries as well, where he says, with the forces of the Vostok Group, in particular fighters of the 36th Brigade, the settlement of Alaskivka was liberated. Quote, we entered the settlement from the starting point, moving on motorcycles, buggies, and then advanced stealthily through forest belts. We bypassed minefields and hid from enemy drones under thermal ponchos, avoiding fortified positions. Thanks to competent command and the courage of the assault troops, the checkpoint was liberated, reported a fighter with the call sign Ninja. They say after clearing the settlement, our troops began to strengthen the lines, ensuring the possibility of further advancement deep in enemy positions. So again, back at the map here, not clear exactly where Ukrainian forces are to the north and south. We've seen this a couple times with small units moving in. Again, even the footage that Russia released of this showed maybe a squad-size element on foot moving in here. Russia says they are reinforcing this village. We'll see if they're able to use that to continue advances in other directions. Or, as it looks on the map right now, this does look pretty vulnerable in a lot of ways. Now, I wanted to shift over to a pretty interesting assessment here put together by Reuters that I'll have linked in the description below. It's kind of this interesting infographics they roll out about what Ukrainian President Zelensky described as, quote, the sanctions that work the fastest, talking about Ukraine's drone campaign striking Russia's energy industry. A couple key aspects here I wanted to highlight. They say Ukraine has launched at least 58 attacks on key Russian energy sites since the start of August, sending drones as far as 2,000 kilometers into Russian territory to bomb refineries, pumping stations, storage depots, and export terminals. That compares with just one such strike in June and 2 in July. So if you've been watching this footage of Russian refineries going up in smoke day after day and think, man, it really seems like there's been an uptick there, you're right. 1 to 2, in the last couple months, 31, I think, in September. It's been a lot. They say drone strikes at various refineries knocked out about 17% of Russia's refining capacity in mid-August, or 1.2 million barrels per day, which rose to 21%, or 1.4 million barrels per day by the end of the month. Russia, for its part, has been pummeling Ukraine's power and natural gas facilities in the last 2 months, causing widespread blackouts and water shortages across the country. And I don't want to lose sight of that. In fact, I heard a good assessment this morning saying that, we're starting to see Russia shift from going after strategic military targets to going after more energy infrastructure in Ukraine as the winter months come on. Just last night, we saw Russia launch 357 munitions at Ukraine. The Ukrainian estimate now is that 280 of those were intercepted. That leaves 77 able to get through and strike targets throughout Ukraine, and they no doubt are having an impact. So this piece here is talking about Ukraine's deep strikes in Russia, which are notable for a lot of reasons we'll get into here in a minute. But I don't want to gloss over the fact that Russia is responding in kind, day in and day out. Now, looking at the tactics here, they say a source with knowledge of Ukraine's long-range attacks against Russian energy facilities said that operations typically include between 20 and 30 drones designed to dive into targets laden with explosives, with a smaller number of decoys sometimes sent beforehand to drain Russia's oil defenses. So a decoy essentially is the same drone, sometimes a little lesser in terms of the technology on board, and certainly no warhead. So it's more cost effective, and they can fire those. We see Russia do this as well, fire those in this same batch, and it just kind of forces Russia to engage, because based off of the radar signature, you can't tell if that is a drone with a warhead or a decoy. So it does, to a degree, start to drain Russia's air defenses. They say the source familiar with Ukraine's attacks said various means were used for navigation and targeting drone strikes. One of the main methods is visual navigation, where the drone uses an onboard camera to match features on the ground to a preloaded map. Unlike GPS-guided navigation, this cannot be hacked or jammed by Russian electronic warfare systems. There's a big answer to how some of these drones are able to fly at times, nearly 2,000 kilometers through Russian airspace. There are jammers in electronic warfare stations set up all throughout that country, and there's certainly a bulk of them around some of these oil refineries. That's one of the ways Ukraine is able to do it, is kind of pre-program a flight path, and it's not a straight line. It's not just moving directly from Ukraine into Russia, but it would be kind of maneuvering through Russian territory to avoid surface-to-air fire and air defense assets, all the while, because they're not reliant on a satellite signal for navigation, technically can't be jammed. Now, when looking at the targets, they say more than half of the strikes, 29, were aimed at oil refineries in the European part of Russia, so more western Russia. The most distant refinery targeted was 1,992 kilometers into Russian territory. They say 3 refineries have been hit at least 3 times in the last 2 months. Ukraine has also carried out at least 18 attacks on pumping facilities, and there have been 6 Ukrainian attacks on Russian export terminals in the Black and Baltic Seas using air and seaborne drones. Now, of course, the big question here is, what is the impact? Is this actually getting anything done? And they quote Sergei Vakulenko, an oil and gas specialist at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center, who said only repeated successful strikes on refineries could knock out the facilities completely out of service. He said, quote, Russia's oil refineries are facing a lot of problems, but things are far from catastrophic. How the situation develops in the coming months depends on whether Ukraine is able to maintain the pace of or even ramp up the attacks. Now, we have seen a significant ramping up of Ukrainian attacks against these targets just in the last couple of months. Ukraine has increased their production of these drones. It seems like they're increasing the efficiency, and we've reported recently that the United States is now assisting Ukraine with the targeting, so maybe highlighting certain refineries at certain times. It would be more vulnerable to some of these Ukrainian drone strikes. I would not throw Tomahawks in the same conversation here. That's, of course, a big topic right now, whether or not the United States will send them. What I've seen recently is that it would be a relatively small number of Tomahawks, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe. If that was the case, yes, they could do significant damage to these refineries. But again, like Vakulenko mentions here, this has to be a sustained long-term operation. And even if every one of those 50 was successful in striking a refinery, Ukraine is it's kind of like a surge, and then Ukraine is immediately back to these drones. I would expect, rather than going after some of these refineries, the Tomahawks, if sent and able to be utilized inside of Russia, they might go after more hardened military targets that, the warheads on these drones might not necessarily be able to penetrate. But nonetheless, really impressive, really interesting piece here on the Ukrainian deep strikes inside of Russian territory laid out by Reuters. We'll have that linked in the description below if anybody wants to check it out in its entirety. I always forget to mention this, but if you enjoy these videos, if you find these videos useful, the best way to support the channel is on Patreon. The link to that program is in the description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.